So yeah, I would prefer than instead of going too much on slides, which is, I would say, for such topic not so interested. Please feel free to interrupt myself and ask questions on things that are interested for you. I don't know your profile, I don't know your experience. Maybe all what I tell you is already known. So I will stop anytime you need. At first, as an introduction of myself, I put the fact that today I'm Quality and Regulatory Affairs Director of the company, but I was previously member of the Photonics 21 board of stakeholders. In fact, I had two lives. I managed teams in R&D activities for 20 years, and I've been appointed in 2014 as a Quality and Regulatory Affairs Director. And it hasn't been good news for me when my president asked me to take this position. I like scientific topics. I hate quality and regulatory affairs topics. I see that we could be in the same world. I got this experience, and finally now, 4 years after I've been appointed at this position, I could tell you that the 4 years I spent at Quality and Regulatory Affairs has been the best time for me learning about good practices and management. The best period of my life. I hope that after this session, you will be also convinced that you could move forward. Just brief introduction of our company. It's not something to sell you, but it's important to understand the context. Horiba is a company located in Kyoto. Company design and manufacture analyzers for gas, liquid, and solids. And company is organized in 5 business segments. Many of them are for scientific or industry. We have one segment, medical segment. And as part of this segment, I worked for a company in Montpellier with over 600 employees. We design and manufacture hematology analyzers and clinical chemistry analyzers that are mainly used in laboratory, in some doctor office, and used for diagnosis. During this session, I will try to introduce a little bit what's our constraint in terms of certification. The most important in what I will share with you is for you to understand why we have decided to follow the certification for the compliance with regulations. Then I will talk a little bit about the registration and difficulties that we face in the main critical countries, and maybe give you a few advice. And some advices match with what Anke told you. I can tell you that 30 years in design, manufacturing, and selling products give us exactly the same experience that has been shared just previously. So thank you, it was a very good introduction. At first, we are a Japanese company, but we design our product in Europe. So that means that we have the constraint of a region. And European has regulations for medical device. Her instruments are classified in IVD regulations. It was briefly introduced by Anke, which means her product does not have any contact with the patient. It means that we are less regulated than medical devices that are in contact with the patient. It's very important for you to know the difference because it changes a lot of the constraints that you will have in Europe, but in worldwide for all the registration process that you have to go through. Our products are classified, and we are in a class 2 today, which means that we don't need to go for registration in Europe. We have auto-certification of our product. The main constraint for us is to be certified ISO 13485. I don't know if you are aware about certification and standards. Before I've been appointed, for me it was numbers. I was not sure to understand really what was the meaning of this certification. And the choice of Horiba is to be certified 13485, and second is to be certified ISO 9001. It's not exactly the same purpose. What we have to understand is that you can find in ISO standards the best practice. which means that instead of trying to find by yourself what you could do, you just have to look at how the other companies have decided to identify the best practice for all the process of the company. ISO 13485 is mainly dedicated to allows you to understand how to put under control the regulation. ISO 9001 is a standard that allows you to put inside your system a process for your company performance. I used to explain to my colleagues that we don't do certification for certification. We do certification to be sure that we are able to deliver products that are compliant with the expectation of the customer, and was part, a very important part from Anke. What are the needs of your customer? Because if he does not receive what he needs, you will lose the customer. And you have many competitors waiting beside you to be able to offer something which is quite similar, but could be more compliant than your product. So you need to be sure that you are compliant with the expectation of your customer. Second thing that is expected from your customer, he never talk about that to you. You need to be compliant with regulation. And we see within Horiba Group how much it has been important with the problem of Volkswagen. We are selling product for exhaust gas analysis. And it has been very, very difficult to demonstrate from Horiba Group that we were not in fault, but it was car companies that were in fault. The regulation were when applied, the way that it has been interpreted by companies was not correct and not in line with the laws. And the last thing that is important, and we don't have to forget that because the duration for you to come to a market is quite long. It could be between 6 to 10 years. Is at the end, you have a customer. You need to improve the customer satisfaction. This is a key. And this is what we experience every day with what we buy. So before thinking that a certification is required, ISO 13485, ISO 9001, you have to understand the reason why we put certification in place. Deliver product compliance with the expectation of the customer, compliance with regulation in a logic of improvement of the customer satisfaction. Then came the issues related to some countries. And even if sometimes you believe that you have understood the needs, regulations are moving quite fast. And more years after years, it's faster and faster. And recently we experienced a very difficult step in your company. Canadian regulation change. So we have to be now compliant with a new program named MDSAP, which is a program that has been recognized by 5 countries: US, Brazil, Australia, Canada, Japan. I would say, finally, from what we got previously, it was not a so major change because we already sold in that countries. What's changed for us is that now we have auditors that are coming in our companies about 12 days a year, looking at all your system, and when they find a non-conformity, they directly report to all the authorities. That means that we are now in a field, in a regulation, for which there is no limit between the knowledge that can have an authority on your system and their expectation. That means that you cannot anymore, as we did in the past, I have to be honest, be in a situation, yes, we know our problem, we know that we have things to do, we discuss with customer. Now we cannot just think that we are not under the vision of the main authorities. And I can tell you that when you send a report to FDA and FDA found that you have non-conformity from an audit, and it happens because your system cannot be always compliant with all the regulation. The first thing that is coming is an FDA inspection. An FDA inspection, you can have a warning letter and be out of the market. And the last thing that we experience also is the need of the customer, because we need certification. But for healthcare, your customer needs also to be accredited. in our field of application, the laboratory now needs to be accredited for 15189, which means that they have to demonstrate to have the best practice, and this certification is a need for them to be able to continue to sell the diagnosis. But the constraint is also a constraint for you as a manufacturer. You need to understand the constraint of your customer in terms of regulation and provide the documentation that is required by that companies. I just wanted to introduce 5 countries. 5 countries in which it's, I would say, quite difficult and quite long to enter on the market. The first is US. Probably for you, it's one of the major markets. And when we try to demonstrate a business plan to a bank, it's difficult to avoid the US market. Problem is to come on the US market, you need to go through a process that is quite long and quite difficult to achieve. We are an IVD player. We are with class 2 product, which means probably the simplest constraints that you can have in medical device. Even if for us, going in the market will require to obtain a 510K. I would say you have 2 solutions when you enter on the US market. At first, you have an equivalent product of your product. We name it predicate, or you don't have. If you don't have an equivalent technology, I would say it's an issue you need to know, because at first, you will have to enter in clinical trials quite expensive. When I say quite expensive, for all the companies that I discuss with, we talk between 1 to 3 million euros at minimum. Which means that if your business model does not introduce some cost related to the regulation to enter on the market, and your market model, the business model is based on a grow on a market where you will not be able to enter, your business model is not correct. So let's come to a constraint. It's not so difficult, but I can tell you that we are not able to achieve a registration at any time. And recently we faced an issue that was quite interesting. We did clinical trials, it's written, on 3 sites. We forget one thing, is who will be the user. And one of the users in US are children, which is pediatrics. In US, pediatrics is 0 to 21 years. That means we thought that pediatrics for us was baby. No, it's not baby for FDA. It's baby, kids, and adults. We make the submission, and we get a very nice intended for use. Your instruments can be used in the US market for any patient except pediatrics. The sales director of US was very happy about this success. But it's just before a clinical study, we did not understood that there were these specific topics to be taken into account in auto registration. Even if when all is going well, difficulty with the FDA is that you have a clock. As soon as you enter in the discussion with FDA, you have 180 days to defend your file, and they have 90 days also to be convinced that your product is equivalent to a predicate device. And if you go out of these 90 days, your file is rejected. Which means that you need to go to a process named pre-submission, for which you defend in front of the FDA which protocol will be used to be sure that they have well understood your best practice, knowing that this is not an engagement of the FDA. They just tell you, today, this is what we believe that is good. And if 2 years later there are new practice, new incident on the market, and they define that no things is expected, this is a law. China. So with China, we have CFDA, and I would say it's very difficult. Not for the same reason. First is that, I don't know if you're aware with Chinese character, But when you take a word in China, I would say a kanji could be a letter for us. When we submit a file in China just using capital letter or non-capital letter, it could be rejected because in some place we are giving the name of the product with capital. In another document, we present the file without capital letter. I have 2 people in my team just dealing with China authority. It's incredible. So at first, it's difficult to go because they are not waiting for you. They have competitors. They have supported, financially supported. So enter in the Chinese market is very, very difficult. Second issue that we face with China is that they ask many, many information on your technology. You have the right to accept to give or not, but they have the right to refuse. So be aware that if you believe that the Chinese market is for you a key market, you will have probably to give very sensitive information on your products. Even if you have IP, because I can tell you that they don't care about IPs. So it's important to know. It could take 2 to 3 years before you get the license. And in any case, the license is not definitive. You have to come back every 5 years for a new license. Brazil is, I would say, not so difficult to enter. The most difficulties that we have with Anvisa is the need to be registered. Today, to be able to have an appointment with Anvisa, it's 3 years. That means even if the process of registration is quite simple, you need to have Anvisa coming in your company to make an audit or an inspection. But the first date you can have now is 2022. You have another solution, is to be MDSAP compliant. I can tell you that if you are in the process of growing your company, to be MDSAP compliant from now is also quite complex. So Brazil, I would say, is not a file issue, it's mainly to be able to be in contact with the authority. Just a word on, yeah? Sorry? No. We are currently trying to discuss with, I would say, we are in Brazil since 1990, so we have been facing many issues with corruption. So we try to see if corruption could be a way to go around. No. No
corruption in terms of
Yeah, I'll talk about that. No, it does not help. The issue that have Brazil authority is that they don't have the people to send abroad. They can do in Brazil, but they don't have enough people. So they say, okay, we take this appointment with you, or BMDSAP. India was very easy to move to India. I would say one very specific thing that we learn with India, I would say, is probably the different type of disease that we can meet. And we have been able to come to that market quite easily the last years, but the condition of patients is so bad in comparison of what we know from Europe or Occidental countries that makes probably very useful for you to conduct specific clinical studies in India before going on that market. When you install the instruments, you need to go through a process of validation and accreditation of your instruments. And this is a condition for you to be paid, which means that you could get good bills from India only if you're sure that your product is full compliant with the patient. But patient does not fit as we are used with Occidental countries, with those countries. Now, the regulation has recently changed, and they ask a lot of information about the process, which means that in manufacturing process, if you have very, I would say, sensitive information, they could ask you about this information. Russia I would say you need a contact, so you cannot do by yourself. And the most difficulty in Russia is corruption. So you need to have the right distributor, be sure that he has the right contact within the authority, and be sure also that he's already been in registration process recently for what he do, to be sure that he has the right contact. We failed all of our registration in Russia since 4 years because we are not with the right distributor. It's not because we don't have the right product, because we don't know what to do, we don't have the right contact. So, as it's written, today we sell in 110 countries and there are 80 regulations applied to our products. You cannot know all these regulations, but be aware that years after years, the constraint is increasing more and more. And even if in Europe, with the new regulations for the medical device, it will become very difficult to be in compliance with the expectation of notified bodies, knowing that even if notified bodies do not know how they will do to answer the new regulation of Europe. It's important to know in your process. This is just not to come in detail on that. This is a typical technical file that we are used to manage for products, which means that when you will enter in your process of development of your product, you need to know what is expected for the class of your product. In our site, in our company, we have few things that are important to know. At first, there are risk management documentation that is required. There are some specific regulations related to that risk management, and the risk management is useful and has the power of supporting the development of product only if it's used at the beginning. Which means that if you are in a process of development of your product, at research level, you should know about risk management before you go to the development of your product. Essential requirements, that's what regulation is requested. Second topic is most important. This is the intended of use. And I would say this is like anchor input. She told us we need to understand the need of the customer, of the user. The regulation needs to understand what is the application of your product. Is it product that is used for laboratory? Is it used for screening? Is it used for diagnosis? Sometimes we believe that we can go out of the border, but the definition is quite different from country to country. So it's important for you to be support. I would advise you to have external consultant for them to give you, for the field of your market, what are the key user and key definition of intended of use, for you to be sure that when you will come back with a certification, as we did, you are not in the same position than us. I have a nice intended for use with half of the user rejected. Then there are many documentations that are required, but it's not so important. When we look at all of that, I would just give you a few advice. I believe that you have understood from my word. The first, it's very important to anticipate. I think we say exactly the same thing. It could be for the user need, it could be for the market where you go. If you know your market, you know what are the regulations. If you know what are the regulations, you know the essential requirements. When I was managing R&D, I was not taking care of that. The issue that we face today, and I'm now in part of the process of registration, we miss a lot of documentation that are required. I cannot go back to R&D and ask them to make the documentation that was not done. So it's very important to anticipate. Yeah. Yes. Yes, for sure. Exactly. Let's remember what I told you at the beginning. What you find in regulation are the best practices. So you have to define how you want to operate your process. If you are out of regulation, it could not be an issue. But you need to define what are the process, how I design, and especially if you have software. Software has been a pain for authority. And you know, if you have most of your technology based on hardware, photonics, somewhere you will have a part of software. So you'll take software engineer, maybe an external company for you to manage that. You will have a software not documented, not compliant with the process of development that is known. There are some regulations that are expected. For instance, in US, if you are not recognized as a 62304 harmonized standard, you cannot go to the market. But you cannot ask to the company that has designed your software to make the documentation, especially on embedded software, if the software engineer is not part of your company. And it's too late. That means you could pay thousands of euros, millions of euros to get software, but you cannot register because you do not follow the right process for software development. And you don't have the documentation available for the registration. So, anticipate. I would say this is more or less good practice in project management. But I would say this is what is required. Make project plan. Take time with your team to think the ways and you will go with your project. Even if you are already within your project, what are the expected results? What are the solutions? What will be the deliverables? What will be the timeline? What will be the responsibilities? Because sometimes a company will come to you and will ask that to you. This is one of the first topics of the CFA rules. What is your quality planning for your program? If you don't have, you are out. We already talked about that. Also for a clinical trial, you talk about that, Anke. This is important for you to know the good practice. In fact, do not try to invent your own protocol. Look at the ways and other companies is doing. There are many standards. There are many definitions of what, in terms of biostatistics, that is expected to make the demonstration that your product works. We often wish to be able to make the demonstration by yourself. But at the end, when you will go through a clinical trial, when you will show data to an external expert, is expecting a specific biostatistic measurement. If you are out, you will have to justify yourself. So you lose time, and you could lose also your certification. So, in summary, from this presentation, from my experience, we always, and still it's difficult for me, we look at regulatory as a constraint. Don't take it as a constraint. Take it as the best opportunity for you to be able to get the right practice and have the right product for your customer. It's difficult to learn about regulatory. After 4 years, it's still difficult. I have experts in my team, but be sure that today we are able to talk about the customer satisfaction and the improvement of this satisfaction because we have in place a quality management system. You need to control and anticipate. I see many startups. I've met some of them that already started to hire regulatory affairs people. There are several reasons for that. It's very difficult to find. Today, there are so many regulations that all the people with expertise in regulatory are already engaged in many companies. So if you come with a person too late, first, you could not have it. Second, you should not be advised at the right time. And third, you will be probably out of the market before you have been able to introduce yourself on that market. So, and this will be my conclusion, take it as an opportunity more than a constraint. I would say this is a way to try today to change our company, but this is also very difficult. Thank you.
Don't hesitate. Now it's the time. Anche.
Yes. But this is a difficulty of most of us. And I can tell you, after 20 years in research, innovation, before I came there, anytime a quality or regulatory affair came in my office, first thing that I was waiting is for him to leave. Because it's not interested. I don't know if you try to read the standard, it's not interested. But in fact, if you can find the right person, even if it is an expert that can help you to understand which is behind, you will understand that there are mainly good recommendations. And if you follow this, I'm used to explain to my president that sometimes he's tired with me when I'm talking about quality and regulatory affairs, because this is what's happened also. You could fight with your quality and regulatory affairs team because they have always constraints, risk, blah, 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 when you talk about technology. I told them regulatory is the voice of the customer. It's unbelievable. But I can tell you that they protect at first the user, the patient, before having things about constraints to your company. What is the cost? It costs. But when you prepare a business plan, you know that you need some competencies for you to be able to achieve. You do not imagine to start the sales without a salesman. You know that it's a cost. I think that it's not because you will add a regulatory experts that it will change your business plan. But if you don't plan to get the regulation in place in your company, you could have the business plan out of your expectation because you go out of the process that is expected. So the cost is needed. It's a requirement. So it's a law. You have law behind that, which means that if you come at the time waiting to get first sales to be able to invest, it's too late. It's too late. 20 years ago, it was not the case. Now, the world has changed a lot. And again, if you look at the cost, you could hesitate it to go, but look at the practice that you will put in place in your system. And probably you will save a lot of money because you have well-defined your protocol, because you go through your clinical trials only one time instead of 3 times. This is what's happened with your study. When I'm going to US, lose the opportunity to enter the market and go again, I paid 300,000 euros 2 times. So what is the cost of an expert besides that? But usually, scientific likes what is difficult. It's something that we are not used to talk about. And I came today here mainly because I was part of this environment before. I moved out, but I would not be able to talk to you like that 4 years ago. It was impossible. I would say, oh, I will never come to a session like that. Yes.
pointed out, so on and so forth. There are certain things that must have to, that they mustn't think they can spend everything on R&D. This is a big
Yeah, you're correct.
The greater challenge comes before a company has managed to raise enough money, they're not paying themselves salaries, they can't afford anything virtually, but they have a fantastic idea and they need to get over that hump to the first round so that they can then afford regulation. So that's the challenge, is helping out those very, very young companies which have an exciting idea but which are completely cash strapped. And they literally cannot afford this kind of thing because they're not even, they're not even paying their bills at home.
But you know, but this is also the reason of such network. It means this is a role also of more mature company to go with new company. We are used to do, we are used to talk, to introduce, try to explain. Sometimes few limited actions should be enough at the beginning. If it's enough, don't try to have all compliant with what is needed. Yeah. And plan for, yeah.
Did you have a question?
So my question is related very much about regulations in Europe. So how it is different in different countries in Europe? So for example, with our project, we have 8 countries. So what is the difference?
Maybe briefly.
Yeah. It's usually you can consider that what is applicable in a country is in Europe is applicable in all the countries. Now, until now, directive was interpreted in each laws. The new European regulation is applicable for all the countries, which means that it will become more standard. Most difficult issues that face today the authority is to be able to explain to the notified body what they have to do and get the experts also to be able to support the process. We move from a world where about 10% of companies that need to register the product, from now 70% of the company will have to register the product. So we face a major issue of availability of people to go to that process.
Okay. Thank you very much again.